In a quiet, leafy neighborhood on the outskirts of Charleston, South Carolina, where oaks hung heavy with Spanish moss and life moved at an unhurried pace, there was a house that seemed frozen in time. The white clapboard structure with green shutters belonged to Martha Whitmore, an 83-year-old retired teacher known for her gentle nature and unwavering kindness. Martha was a widow, living alone since her husband passed away a decade earlier. Yet she never seemed lonely. Her days were filled with memories, tending to her garden, and the occasional chat with neighbors. One of those neighbors was Rick Collins, a man in his early 40s with a complicated past that few in the neighborhood fully knew. He lived across the street, renting a small, run-down house that always seemed to echo with tension. Martha would often wave to him from her porch, even when his eyes darted away. She believed in the power of compassion and kindness, even toward those who seemed lost or troubled. Rick, however, was a figure that whispered rumors, tales of misfortune, bad decisions, and broken promises that wove their way through the neighborhood grapevine. But Martha refused to listen to gossip. She chose to see hope, even in the darkest corners. Yet, there was another figure who watched Martha with deep, unwavering eyes. This was Tress, a muscular yet gentle-hearted German shepherd belonging to the Hartleys next door. Tress had grown up under the loving care of Sam Hartley, a retired firefighter with a booming laugh and a heart as open as the southern sky. Sam and his wife, Diane, treated Tress not as a pet but as family, and Tress had developed an intuitive sense for reading emotions, a trait that would soon prove far more valuable than anyone could have imagined. Tress's days were typically filled with bounding through the yard, playing fetch with Sam, and basking in the warm Carolina sun. But he was more than just a playful companion. He was a guardian in every sense of the word. He had once barked relentlessly until Sam realized their gas stove had been left on, narrowly avoiding a disaster. The Hartleys spoke of Tress with a reverence that bordered on legendary, sharing stories of his uncanny awareness and loyalty. It was on a crisp autumn afternoon that the winds of fate began to stir. The streets were unusually quiet, with the neighborhood children still at school and the soft rustle of fallen leaves the only sound. Martha was preparing for her usual afternoon tea, a ritual she held sacred, when an unexpected knock shattered the silence. She paused, her frail hand trembling slightly as she set down her cup. The knock was followed by another, louder and more insistent. Martha walked to the door, her heart drumming with an unease she couldn't place. When she opened it, Rick stood there, his eyes wild and unfocused, reeking of cheap whiskey. He had never come to her door before, and his presence felt heavy, almost suffocating. Before she could speak, he pushed past her, his voice slurring as he demanded money. Panic tightened her chest as she realized she was trapped in her own home, a place that had always felt like a sanctuary. Rick's voice rose, punctuating the quiet house with anger and desperation. He knocked over a lamp, sending it crashing to the floor, its shattered pieces scattering across the polished wood. "I need it, Martha. Just give me what you have," he shouted, his breath ragged. Martha's eyes filled with tears as she backed away, her fragile frame quivering with fear. The room spun around her as memories of her late husband's voice echoed in her mind, reminding her to be strong, to hold on. From the window of the Hartleys' home, Tress's ears perked up at the unfamiliar sound of Martha's distressed voice. His golden eyes narrowed as he sensed something was terribly wrong. With the agility of a dog half his age, he leapt off the porch, his paws thudding against the ground as he bolted toward Martha's house. Sam and Diane were out for a brief visit to town, leaving Tress alone, free to follow his instincts. The German shepherd's powerful strides carried him across the lawn in seconds, his mind focused solely on the familiar scent of Martha and the sharp, pungent hint of fear that permeated the air. The screen door creaked as Tress nudged it open with his nose, entering the house where chaos awaited. Rick spun around, startled by the sudden movement. His eyes met Tress's fierce gaze, a warning gleaming in the depths of the dog's usually gentle eyes. A tense silence fell over the room, thick and suffocating. Martha's breath caught in her throat as she watched, hope flickering in the depths of her terror-stricken eyes. Rick's body tensed as he glared at Tress, who stood firm, blocking the path between him and Martha. The German shepherd's fur bristled as a low growl rumbled from deep within his chest, vibrating the air with a warning that was impossible to ignore. Tress's eyes, usually filled with warmth, were now sharp with an intensity that spoke of loyalty and courage. In that moment, he was more than just a family pet. He was a protector, willing to face whatever danger threatened the woman who had shown him kindness countless times. "Get out of my way," Rick barked, his voice a mix of frustration and disbelief as he staggered toward the dog. His hands, rough and calloused from years of hard labor and poor choices, clenched at his sides. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, as the confrontation unfolded. Martha, frozen in place, could only watch as her heart pounded against her ribcage, each beat drumming a silent plea for safety. Tress didn't move. Instead, his growl deepened, teeth bared in a show of defiance. He wasn't a trained guard dog, but instinct guided him now. The moment stretched into what felt like hours as the German Shepherd stood his ground. Rick hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing his bloodshot eyes. He had faced fights before, but never had he been challenged by a force so pure, so unyieldingly brave. The seconds ticked by, punctuated only by Martha's shaky breathing and the sound of the wind rattling the branches outside. As Rick advanced another step, Tress lunged forward with a powerful bark that echoed through the house. The sudden movement sent a shock of fear through Rick, causing him to stumble backward into the table behind him. The wooden surface trembled under his weight, and a vase toppled, shattering into pieces on the floor. The crash jolted Martha, snapping her out of her stunned paralysis. She gasped, tears streaking down her cheeks as she realized that Tress wasn't just defending her. He was risking everything to protect her from harm. Rick's anger flared again, this time mixed with the unmistakable taste of fear. He raised his arm as if to strike, but Tress was faster. With a leap that belied his age, the German Shepherd latched onto Rick's sleeve, yanking him sideways and off balance. Rick's feet tangled, and he fell hard against the floor. The wind knocked out of him as Tress released his grip and positioned himself protectively between Martha and her attacker. Outside, a neighbor who had been tending to their garden heard the commotion and rushed to see what was happening. The sight that met them through the open front door was enough to send them sprinting back to their house to call the police. Inside, Rick lay gasping, the realization of defeat dawning on him as he stared up at the German Shepherd who had bested him, not with brute force, but with unyielding loyalty. Martha's eyes, wide and filled with relief, met Tress's gaze. In that silent exchange, gratitude flowed from her to him, and she whispered, "Good boy, Tress. You saved me." Tress's ears perked up at her voice, and the tension in his stance softened just enough to show he understood. His tail wagged briefly, a flicker of his usual, loving self returning amid the storm that had just passed. The wail of sirens in the distance grew louder, signaling the arrival of help. Tress's ears twitched, acknowledging the sound, but his eyes never left Rick. The man, now subdued and dazed, sat up slowly, the fight drained from him. Martha took a shaky step forward, her hands still trembling but her spirit somehow stronger. She reached out to Tress, feeling the warmth of his fur beneath her fingers, and whispered, "Thank you, my brave friend." Minutes later, uniformed officers filled the small house, taking Rick into custody without further struggle. The officer in charge exchanged a look of admiration with Martha as she recounted what had happened, tears slipping down her face as she described Tress's courage. One of the officers, a young woman with kind eyes, knelt down and scratched Tress behind the ears, murmuring, "You're a hero, aren't you?" Tress responded with a soft woof, his eyes gentle once more. As the police led Rick out in handcuffs, the neighbors gathered around, murmuring in hushed voices, their expressions a mixture of shock and awe. Sam and Diane, who had just returned from their errand, pushed their way through the crowd, their hearts racing as they took in the scene. Diane gasped, her hand flying to her mouth when she saw Martha, but relief swept over her when she noticed Tress standing tall and unharmed beside her. Sam's eyes filled with emotion as he looked at his loyal companion. He knelt down, pulling Tress into a fierce embrace. "Good boy, Tress," he whispered, his voice thick with pride and gratitude. "You did good." As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the neighborhood, the aftermath of the incident unfolded with a mix of relief and quiet reflection. The police had taken Rick away, and neighbors lingered, murmuring among themselves, recounting the bravery of Tress to anyone who would listen. The story had already spread down the block, the tale of how a dog defended an elderly woman with more courage than most humans could muster. Martha sat in her favorite chair, a patchwork quilt draped over her shoulders as she sipped a cup of tea that Sam had made for her. The tremor in her hands had subsided, replaced by a calm that settled over her like a comforting blanket. She glanced at Tress, who lay at her feet, his eyes watchful but soft. He seemed to sense that his work was not yet done, that the echo of fear still lingered in the corners of the room. Sam, seated across from her, rubbed his calloused hands together, the lines of worry on his face beginning to ease. "Martha," he said, his deep voice steady, "we owe Tress more than we can ever repay. He's part of this community in a way few will ever understand." Martha's eyes misted over as she nodded. "He's more than a dog," she whispered, reaching down to run her fingers through Tress's golden fur. The gentle animal looked up, his tail thumping once on the floor as if to affirm her words. He was tired, but not from exertion, from the emotional weight of the day. Even as exhaustion settled into his limbs, he stayed alert, ready to protect the person who had always been so kind to him. The evening air outside cooled, and porch lights blinked on one by one, casting a soft glow over the street. Neighbors walked up to Martha's house, some with casseroles and others with concerned smiles. They all wanted to express their gratitude for Tress's bravery, to tell Martha that she was not alone. Sam opened the door to a steady stream of visitors, each one more moved than the last. "You've got quite a hero on your hands," one of the older men said, tipping his hat toward Tress, who wagged his tail in response. Diane, who had busied herself organizing the small living room, paused to take in the scene. The room was filled with warmth, both literal, from the fire Sam had lit, and figurative, from the love and support of friends. Diane bent down and kissed Tress's head. "You saved her, boy," she whispered, tears gathering in her eyes. "You saved us all." As the night deepened, the last of the neighbors trickled out, leaving only Sam, Diane, Martha, and Tress in the room. The quiet returned, but this time it was different, not fearful, but peaceful, tinged with gratitude. Martha took a deep breath and glanced at Diane. "I can't imagine what would have happened if Tress hadn't been here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's more than just a guardian. He's a blessing." Tress shifted, sensing the shift in mood. The tension had fully ebbed, replaced by a sense of shared understanding. He let out a contented sigh and laid his head on Martha's feet, finally allowing himself to relax. The old woman reached down and stroked him gently, the room bathed in the soft glow of the fireplace. The crackling flames seemed to mirror the quiet resilience of everyone present, a reminder that even in the face of fear, courage could be found in the most unexpected places. But the true turning point came the following day when news of Tress's heroism spread beyond their quiet street. A local journalist, who had heard about the event through a neighbor, arrived to write an article. He was a young man with sharp eyes and a notepad that never seemed to rest. The story he would write would make its way to the local news station, showcasing Tress's act of courage to a wider audience. Calls came flooding in from residents, asking about the German Shepherd who had stood as a barrier between danger and the vulnerable. By evening, a segment about Tress aired on the evening news. Clips of Martha, still shaken but smiling with gratitude, and Tress, sitting obediently by her side, were broadcasted across Charleston. "This dog, Tress, showed a level of bravery that inspires us all," the anchor concluded, his voice filled with admiration. The town responded with an outpouring of love. People began dropping off treats, cards, and even letters addressed to Tress. Sam and Diane were taken aback by the attention but welcomed it with open hearts. The phone rang with offers from local organizations wanting to honor Tress, recognizing him as a symbol of loyalty and courage. Martha's heart swelled with pride each time someone mentioned Tress's name. She felt a connection to him that went beyond words, a bond forged in a moment of fear but sealed by the unwavering loyalty that only an animal could give. The quiet evenings that followed were marked by reflection and newfound peace. Every time Tress lay by her feet or nudged her hand with his nose, Martha felt a reassurance that was as comforting as the fire crackling in the hearth. Tress's actions had not only protected her that day, but had also reminded everyone that true heroism knows no bounds. It can come from a place of instinct, driven by love and loyalty, untainted by hesitation or fear. He had become a beacon of hope in their small corner of Charleston, a reminder that even when darkness loomed, light could shine through the most unexpected of sources. As the days turned into weeks, Tress's heroism became the talk of the town. The local news piece had resonated deeply, sparking stories from residents who recounted times when their own pets had shown acts of unexpected bravery. It seemed as if Tress's story had reignited a shared appreciation for the silent protectors that walked among them, tails wagging and eyes filled with unspoken devotion. Martha found herself surrounded by visitors more often than not. Neighbors who once exchanged only polite nods at the mailbox now stopped to chat, bringing with them homemade pies and warm smiles. Each visit started with an eager question: "How's Tress today?" Martha would smile, her eyes softening as she looked at the German Shepherd resting by her side, always alert, as if on duty. One afternoon, as the late autumn sun cast a golden hue across the yard, a knock on the door announced the arrival of someone new. Martha opened the door to find a man in his 50s, dressed in a crisp uniform adorned with patches and badges. His eyes were kind, yet serious, as he introduced himself as Officer Raymond Clark, head of the local K-9 unit. Behind him stood Luna, a sleek German shepherd with intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor. "I heard about Tress's act of bravery," Officer Clark began, his gaze shifting to the German shepherd, "and I'd like to officially recognize him for what he did." Luna's tail wagged gently as she sat beside her handler, her presence adding an air of respect to the occasion. Martha's eyes widened, and a warmth spread through her chest. Tress, sensing something special was happening, stood up and wagged his tail, his eyes bright with curiosity. Officer Clark knelt to meet Tress's gaze, his expression softening. "You're a hero, Tress," he said, reaching out to scratch the retriever's ears. "Not every dog would have done what you did." The small gathering turned into an impromptu ceremony as neighbors who had heard about the visit gathered on Martha's lawn, some with their own dogs in tow. Sam and Diane stood proudly at the front, Sam's arm draped around Diane's shoulders as they watched. Officer Clark presented Martha with a certificate recognizing Tress's bravery, an official token from the police department honoring his act of heroism. The crowd clapped, cheers echoing down the street as Tress barked once, as if to acknowledge the applause. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed and evening settled over the neighborhood, Martha sat on her porch with Tress at her feet. The German shepherd's head rested on her lap, eyes closed in peaceful contentment. She traced the edge of the certificate with her fingers, the words "Honorary Hero" glistening under the soft light. A tear slipped down her cheek, not from fear or relief, but from gratitude. The incident had changed more than just Martha's perception of safety. It had altered the way she viewed the community and herself. The quiet, almost invisible bonds that connected them all had grown stronger. Where once Martha felt the walls of her home were her only sanctuary, she now felt the embrace of the neighborhood, a safety net woven from shared experiences and newfound camaraderie. Tress's life, too, changed subtly but profoundly. His days were still filled with playful moments, chasing after squirrels and stretching out in patches of sun. But there was a new recognition in the way people spoke to him, a reverence that had not been there before. He became a symbol of hope for many, a reminder that even in the most unexpected moments, courage could manifest in surprising forms. One crisp morning, Sam and Diane watched from their window as Martha and Tress sat under the oak tree in her yard. The leaves had turned fiery shades of red and orange, falling in gentle whispers around them. Martha spoke to Tress as if he were an old friend, recounting stories from her youth, tales of love and loss, of hope and resilience. Tress listened, his ears twitching now and then, his gaze never straying from her face. Sam turned to Diane, a smile tugging at his lips. "Funny how a dog can remind people of what really matters," he said, his voice low but filled with awe. Diane nodded, reaching for Sam's hand. "It's more than that," she replied. "He showed us that love isn't just words, it's action. It's standing by someone, even when you don't have to." The days that followed brought colder winds, and Martha prepared her home for winter with the help of Sam and Diane. They installed storm windows and brought in firewood, sharing laughter and warm cider as they worked. Tress trotted between them, his tail wagging at the sight of the people he loved working together, the pack that had come to mean everything to him. On one particular evening, as frost glazed the windows and the fire crackled in Martha's living room, she sat surrounded by the warmth of friendship and the ever-faithful presence of Tress. The certificate Officer Clark had given her was framed and placed on the mantel, a small but significant symbol of the day that had changed everything. As Martha sipped her tea and felt the gentle pressure of Tress's head against her leg, she whispered softly, "We did it, my friend. We found our way back to peace." Tress shifted, letting out a contented sigh as he closed his eyes, his golden fur catching the firelight. The room settled into a comfortable silence, the kind that spoke of battles fought and won, of fears faced and overcome. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, surrounded by love and loyalty, there was nothing but warmth. Winter settled over Charleston with a gentle chill, and the neighborhood found itself wrapped in the embrace of holiday lights and the scent of wood smoke drifting from chimneys. Martha's house, once quiet and solitary, now hummed with a warmth that resonated beyond its walls. It had become a place where people came not just to check on her well-being but to find comfort and companionship. And at the heart of it all was Tress, The German Shepherd who had become more than just a hero, he had become a symbol of community spirit. On Christmas Eve, the neighborhood gathered for a small celebration at Martha's. Sam and Diane brought hot cider and freshly baked cookies, their laughter filling the air as they helped set up the living room. Children played in the yard, their laughter drifting in through the open window as Tress watched with a gentle, protective eye. Even as the snow began to fall, dusting the rooftops in white, there was a warmth that defied the chill. Martha sat in her favorite chair, her frail hands wrapped around a steaming mug as she took in the scene. The room was alight with the soft glow of candles, their flames dancing in time with the music that played softly in the background. Tress lay at her feet, his head resting on his paws, but his eyes following every movement, ever the watchful guardian. For the first time in years, Martha felt a sense of completeness, a piece that had been missing since her husband's passing. The doorbell rang, and Diane hurried to answer it, revealing Officer Clark standing in the snow with Luna by his side. The German Shepherd's tail wagged as she spotted Tress, a silent greeting between two comrades who understood what it meant to protect. Officer Clark stepped inside, shaking the snow from his coat, and smiled at Martha. "I couldn't stay away," he said. "I heard there was a celebration, and I thought Luna and I should come by." Martha beamed, a light in her eyes that had been absent for too long. "You're always welcome here," she said, gesturing for him to join the others by the fire. Tress stood up, wagging his tail as he greeted Luna, a brief touch of noses between the dogs that spoke of shared understanding and mutual respect. As the evening deepened, stories began to unfold. Sam recounted tales from his days as a firefighter, his voice animated as he spoke of close calls and camaraderie. Diane shared memories of childhood winters, her laughter filling the room and drawing smiles from everyone present. Officer Clark shared the incredible stories of the K-9 unit, tales of heroism that resonated with the act that had brought them all together. But when the conversation turned to Tress, the room fell into a respectful silence. Martha leaned forward, placing a hand on Tress's head. "There was a time," she began, her voice steady but soft, "when I thought I had seen all that life had to offer. But Tress showed me that there's always more. More love, more bravery, more reasons to believe in the goodness around us." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and the room seemed to hold its breath, everyone feeling the weight of her words. The silence was broken by a soft bark from Tress, as if to agree. The room erupted in gentle laughter, and the spell was lifted, replaced by a warmth that was as tangible as the fire crackling in the hearth. Diane reached out and took Martha's hand, squeezing it gently. "He's brought us all together," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "And we're better for it." The night wore on, the snow outside falling thicker now, blanketing the street in a quiet white shroud. Tress moved from person to person, accepting pets and scratches, his presence calming and steady. When he settled back at Martha's feet, she reached down to stroke his fur, feeling the steady thrum of his heartbeat beneath her fingers. It was a simple act, but it spoke volumes, a silent thank you, a shared understanding that words could never fully capture. As the fire dwindled and the last of the guests said their goodbyes, Martha stood at her door, watching as the lights of the neighbors' houses twinkled like stars. The air was crisp, biting at her cheeks, but she felt warm from within. Tress pressed close to her side, his fur brushing against her leg as they watched Sam and Diane wave from across the street before closing their own door against the cold. Martha sighed, a sound that spoke of contentment rather than weariness. "Come on, Tress," she said softly, stepping back inside and closing the door. The house, now quiet, felt full, not just of memories, but of the promise of many more to come. Tress followed her to her chair, curling up beside it as she settled in. The fire still crackled faintly, casting shadows that danced along the walls. Before drifting off to sleep, Martha whispered into the stillness, "Thank you, Tress, for reminding me that love never truly leaves us. It just changes form." The German Shepherd lifted his head, eyes meeting hers for a moment, as if he understood. His tail thumped softly against the floor before he rested his head once more, content and vigilant, even in rest. Outside, the snow fell silently, wrapping the world in a blanket of white. But inside that little house on the corner of Charleston, there was a warmth that defied even the coldest of nights, a warmth that came from loyalty, love, and the silent hero who lay by the fire, forever guarding the heart of the woman he had saved. It's an honor to be able to create content for you. If you want to support the channel even more, you can follow the instructions that I will leave on the pinned comment. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Love you all.